Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. James Rollins joins us on this episode, so Sam and myself sit down with James and have a fantastic conversation. Whether you're familiar with his work or not, we hope you enjoy this one because we sure did. Check the show notes for links to his website and where you can find his books. If you have not left a review for the podcast, let us know what you think. Give us a rating, anything. We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email with a book recommendation or a film recommendation. Find us on socials, same kind of thing. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge. James Rollins is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Sigma Force series, including Sandstorm, Map of Bones, Black Order, The Judas Strain, and many others. He's written 6 individual adventure thrillers and the blockbuster movie novelization Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He is written under the pen name James Clemens, in which he authored several fantasy novels in the Godslayer Chronicles series and the Banned and the Banished series. In August 2024, he released Archangel, the 18th book in the Sigma Force novel series, and in February 25, his latest book will be available, titled A Dragon of Black Glass. It is the 3rd book in the fantasy series A Moonfall Saga. James, thank you very much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you here. It must be pretty neat to look back on where you started with writing and where you are now. It almost seems full circle for you. Can you tell us about the trajectory of how you got us to here with this new series?
It was a strange path. I mean, I was about to say I was a veterinarian. I'm still a veterinarian, even though I only do volunteer work with my degree. So I began writing. I wrote my first story, which I thought was science fiction. It had telepathic marsupial creatures that were buried 2 miles underneath Antarctica. It leads to a big, gigantic sort of Jurassic Park type adventure underneath the Arctic ice. And so I was pitching it as science fiction, but my editor was like, "Oh no, Jim, this is a modern day thriller because it's not set in the future. Apparently, that's the requirement for all science fiction; it has to be set in the future." But I'm saying, well, what about the telepathic marsupial creatures that live underneath Antarctica? He says, "Oh, well, that's fine because it takes place in present day." So I came up, reading a lot of science fiction and fantasy growing up, and so when I wrote my first thriller, which I thought was science fiction, was not having any success selling that book. Got a lot of rejections. Literally, I had 49 different agents who said this is literally one of them wrote me a personal note on the back of the form rejection letter. This is unpublishable. So that sort of got stuck in my head. I thought, well, maybe I'm not a science fiction writer. Maybe I should set aside Subterranean and work on a new project. So I began working on the first book of the Banned and Banished series, thinking, well, I'll jump into fantasy. So I had this idea for this fantasy set in a world where magic had vanished for a long period of time and then reappears to this. It was basically a male-driven fantasy. Only men could wield this magic, and then millennia later, after magic has vanished from this world, it reoccurs, but it first it reappears to a girl. And so it's a big grand adventure over 5 books. So then I was just about finished that book when I got the first sort of nibble for Subterranean, where somebody saw the diamond in the rough and said, "Hey, maybe we could do something with this." And at the same time, it was a long story behind this, involving assaulting Ron Howard and other things that occurred during at a conference. I ended up selling my fantasy series because Terry Brooks was one of the he was a judge for the contest for at this conference, and he had read the beginning of the Band and Panish series and said, I really like this. And so I actually invited my editor to come to this conference. I wanted him to meet you. So based upon that personal introduction, I ended up with a 3-book fantasy series with Del Rey. And then I get back home and my agent said, "Hey, you know what? We just are in a negotiation with 2 different publishing houses for your thriller." So I went from unpublished 1 week to a week and a half later. I all of a sudden have two different genres, 2 different publishing houses. So early in my career, I was doing a fantasy every year and a thriller every year, and I did that for a long period of time, for about 7, 8 years. Eventually, James Rollins became a little more popular than James Clemens. And so I sort of set aside the fantasy world for a period of time, basically almost 15 years. But I sort of look back on those early years with fondness because I liked actually doing a fantasy year and a thriller year because they're two different genres that require a different set of writing chops to handle. And so it was fun writing like a staccato paced thriller. And then once sort of I was tired of the staccato paced thriller set in the real world where I had to, go on Google Maps or Google Earth and make sure everything was accurate and detailed. And I put Starbucks at the correct intersection of this story. And then switching to a fantasy, which is my own creation, where it's all world building and creating the history and the governments and the trauma and the dilemma. And also it's a bit richer prose because you're allowed to do that with fantasy. Fantasy readers expect to be immersed in this world, and you want to invite them into the world. So it's fun, switching gears over to that. And then once I'm done with that fantasy, I was like, okay, I'm ready to go back to this staccato paced thriller. So after doing almost 15 years of just doing two thrillers a year, I was ready to go back to trying to alternate. So that became the genesis of the Moonfall saga. I've been working on that for about a decade. I had the first idea for this story about 10 days before, or 10 years before I began writing the first book in that series, because I always got my antenna up looking for ideas. I think it's true for any author. You're always just trying to find that next idea that's going to be the next book, especially if you're writing two books a year. You're always looking for that next idea. And I read an article in Scientific America about tidally locked planets. Those are planets that circle their sun with one side always facing the sun, one side eternally in darkness. And our moon basically is a tidally locked satellite that circles our planet, one side always facing us, one side not. But also planets do that also. So I was really fascinated by that. And I'm really curious, can life exist on a planet of that extreme, where one side's constantly baked by the sun, one side's frozen in internal darkness? And so I talked to some astrophysicists because, again, I've sort of over 30 years of writing, I've garnered quite a bit of scientists that are willing to talk to me, mostly because I show interest in their work. If you ever want to have a scientist talk to you, it's very easy because their wife or their husband doesn't want to hear about their work. But if there's an interested party, they will tell you everything. The nuclear codes are what? Let me write this down. Uh, so I asked astrophysicists, is it possible for life to exist on a tidally locked planet? He said, well, sure, because of the thermodynamics of that planet, the pumping of hot air to the cold side and cold side back to the other side, there's probably a temperate band between those two extremes where theoretical life could exist. And then I talked to some xenobiologists. What would life look like in that? How would that look like in that? What life could survive in that type of environment? And so that began over the 10 years, just sort of layering this world to begin writing the Moonfall saga. So the Moonfall saga takes place on a tidally locked planet. Everybody's living on called the Crown, which is the circlet of habitable area. But of course, I have to think what is the threat? What is the big world global threat that's going to be the drive for the story? And again, talking to those astrophysicists, I was saying, okay, now let's say, what if the Earth stops spinning? Let's say, for some reason the Earth becomes tidally locked to our sun. What would happen to the moon? And they basically said two things will happen. If the Earth stops spinning, there is a mass still. Earth still has mass, so it's going to still hold the moon. But because it's not spinning, already the moon is slowly drifting away from us already. And if it stops spinning, it may accelerate that or it may reverse that. And they don't really they're still not 100% sure what would happen. Either the moon would crash into the Earth or it would drift away. So of course, me being the wanting to build a threat, I'm thinking, of course, the moon is going to crash into the planet. That is the threat that the heroes have to face. And there's a young swamp girl who gets poisoned by an apex predator of this globe, and during her envenomation, she has this sort of prophetic dream of the moon crashing into the planet. Now, some people believe this because so there's some alchemists that have noticed, the moon has over the last century been slowly, incrementally, when the moon is full, been increasing in size. That should be concerning. And so when she comes with this prophecy, it begins this sort of quest to decide, is she mad? Is this really going to happen? And if so, at a sort of a medieval level of society, how do you stop your moon from crashing into your planet? And so that becomes the big quest of the four-book series, which A Dragon of Black Glass is number three.
I find it interesting that for a fantasy novel, you had to do a lot of research with scientists that you would normally see in a science fiction novel. And I've been listening to it on Audible. It does feel like a kind of fantasy sci-fi hybrid in a way.
Well, even my thrillers, I always describe them as scientific thrillers because even in the Sigma Force, they faced AI, nanotechnology. threats. They've dealt with quantum physics. So there's a lot of sort of high science involved in my thrillers also. So even my I describe this almost as a scientific fantasy. Yes, they're going to see the typical fantasy, tropes, and there's going to be adventure, and there's going to be, swashbuckling and fights and wars, but ultimately also there's a lot of science behind the story.
When you talked about writing 2 books a year, I mean, what kind of, just to work back a little bit, like what kind
Sure.
of discipline does that take? Like, is this a I get up every morning and I write from this time to this time? Or we've talked to several authors who have sort of described their workflow, but to get to produce 2 books a year, I could barely get my taxes in, right? Like, so you're publishing two
Me too.
books. How does that like what does that workflow look like?
Well, I went back to when I first started writing, like I said, I had a veterinary career, I had my own practice. And so to find a space to writing, I had to figure out how does writing fit in my professional life. It took a while to figure that out. I think anybody that has a day job that wants to write has to figure out what is that life work balance, especially when you throw writing into that. And so I kept trying to figure how does that comfortably fit where I'm not feeling like that's all I'm doing is working at the clinic, then going home and writing, and then sleeping, and then doing it all over again. Being the bit of a procrastinator that I am, which may sound contradictory, writing 2 books a year, is that if I try to set a time stamp to it, like I'm going to write an hour today, every day I have to write 1 hour. Well, I will, oh, I have to research that, and oh, I have to do this, and nothing will actually get written. So I found that what I had to do is make a commitment to myself to write pages. So first I thought I'm going to write 3 pages a day. I could do that. Tried that. Thought, nope, I'm going to do 3 double-space pages a day. So basically, I chopped my workload in half. Uh, Not every day. I'm gonna do 5 out of 7 days of the week. I'm going to write 3 double-space pages, which is basically a page and a half of writing. So I found that fit comfortably. I could do that without feeling like it's impinging. But even doing 3 double-space pages a day, 5 out of 7 days of the week, those pages accumulate fairly rapidly. They pile up pretty quickly, and momentum builds. The story begins to form more concretely beyond the outline. So that I found that worked for me. And so I thought if I ever get rid of my day job when I'm not practicing, 8, 10, 12 hours a day at the veterinary clinic, I'll be much more productive. And of course, I am 5 double-space pages a day. That's all I can write. It takes me about an hour to write a page. So that's about 5 hours of new writing. By that point, my butt's too tired. My mind's a little wasted. I hit a wall. And I just have to accept that. And that's my wall. That's what I do basically is I do 5 pages, double space 5 days, 5 out of 7 days of the week. And if you just do that regularly, you can do 2 books a year.
And you mentioned, I mean, when you're doing, you talked about, 2 different types of writing chops where you have you're creating a staccato paced thriller and a world building and kind of an immersive fantasy. What are the key differences, and what makes either achievable as you're building? Like, what is the, I mean, to build, what have you found have been the keys to creating that staccato pace, and then what is your path to world building? Are you drawing inspiration? Like, how, I'm curious how, because they feel like 2 separate things that you're kind of able to sort of interchange with, and that's a gift, right? Like, or a discipline.
Or
It's
ma- or, ma- or madness. It's hard to say.
That's
The
right.
I tried one time doing both concurrently. When you mentioned Sandstorm, sort of the prequel to the Sigma series, I wrote that at the same time I was writing one of my fantasy novels, and that was like stripping gears in my head. Trying to do like a chapter of the fantasy, then switching around to do the chapter of the thriller. It just didn't work. I have to sort of gear everything towards that staccato pace, which means that when you're writing in present day in the modern world, you can shortcut a lot of things. I don't have to describe what a spoon is. If I say, he picked up a spoon, you know what that is. Now, when I'm writing a fantasy, I'm probably going to call it a spoon also, but maybe that's not what they call that. Maybe they use a different utensil in that world, and so everything needs to be sort of decided on when you're writing a fantasy. And if it is an exotic enough world, you end up having to describe a lot of the details that just aren't readily available, and can be, footnoted with just saying that it's a spoon. So you end up having to do a lot more world building to figure out, what is the dietary restrictions of this world, and how do they eat and when do they eat, and in this tidally locked world where there are extremes, what is that? How do I balance all of that? So it takes a lot more description to build that world. Whereas with a Staccato-based thriller, I don't have to do a lot of that. I might have to describe an exotic setting. If I'm going to take a story into Hong Kong or something, I'm going to have to introduce my readers to Hong Kong a little bit, but I don't have to go overly, overboard with the description of that. So you're allowed to be leaner when you're telling the story in the modern world, whereas you have to build a lot more immersive detail into that fantasy world.
I'm interested to know what fans of yours, how have they accepted or how have they come to read the new books, the new fantasy series? Are they reading them? Are they saying, that's I'm not a fantasy reader. I like the thrillers. What are you hearing from the readers?
Well, there's definitely some that's just not their cup of tea. They're just not going to go there. But a lot of people will go, well, I trust Jim. I'm going to go ahead and take a sample of this. And some of them like it. Some of them go, this just isn't. It's just too dense. It's just too. This isn't the story I like to read, which is perfectly fine. And it's been a very poorly kept secret that James Clemens and James Rollins were the same person. After a period of time, everybody sort of knows that. So
Right.
and that other, I mentioned before, even when I was doing the thrillers, I was doing like a Sigma thriller every year and then something else. So that something else allowed me to delve into the secret corners of the thriller world. I co-wrote a trilogy about vampires in the Vatican. So again, fairly fantastical element, even though it's based on history and science and a lot of cool stuff I put into that book, that trilogy. But again, some people will read that, go, "That's really cool." I didn't really want to read a vampire novel, but I read it and I really enjoyed it. It's actually, of all your books, that's what I still now like the best. So it's fun seeing people that think they don't like a certain genre sampling into that and then finding, hey, actually, I actually like that. And I'm finding that a lot with the fantasy series too. People that go, oh, really haven't read fantasy in a long time, or I just haven't read fantasy, but boy, that was really a cool story. I really enjoyed that.
Is it more fun? Is there one that's more fun for you to write, or is it the same for you?
I get that asked a lot. Wish you like writing better. I like writing better whatever I'm not writing then. It seems like when I'm writing a fantasy, I'm dreaming of, oh, I wish I didn't have to describe this great detail. I wish I could do this that staccato paced thriller. Or, I'm writing this fantasy and I wish they had a telephone or they had a means of communication that I don't have access to. Whereas I'm writing the thrillers, I work from very loose outlines. So oftentimes I paint my characters into a corner. And I like that because if I don't know how to get them out of the corner, neither is my reader. So it's always a good jam. But then I got to think of how to get them out of that corner. So sometimes like, gosh, I wish somebody had a superpower right now because I have no idea how to get them out of this jam. So there's pros and cons to both genres. And it seems like whenever I'm immersed in one story, the other one always seems easier. But once I switch over to the other story, this seems even harder than what I just finished, and I can't wait to get back to the other book. So it's frustrating. Put it that
Wait,
way.
would you be giving something away if you talked about if you told us shared a time where you kind of painted yourself in a corner and you're like, oh man, I'm kind of stuck here, and how you got out of that?
So I don't want to give any specifics because I don't
Yeah.
want to ruin the element of the story. But Sigma Force, they're always getting into jams. They're always into a bunch of trouble. And the problem is that what one thing we're going to talk about is maybe like what movies I like watching. And I just literally just before I came up here to do this Zoom, I finished watching Tremors. And what I like Tremors is that the monsters have a very defined ability and quality that the heroes have to sort of outwit. I like the fact that it's a very structured monster. It's got this, and this is the way you're going to deal with it, and they deal with it in a very intelligent manner. So whenever I build a story where I painted my characters in the corner, I want their way out of the corner, not to break any rules. I don't want to have, something that feels out of left field. It has to feel germane to the story. So what, again, maybe I'm going to ruin a bit of my mystique and how I get these characters so creatively out of the corner. A lot of times what I'll have to do then is I'll have to seed something that put them in the corner, but I realize there's no way out of the corner. How they're going to get out of the jam, and I sort of figure how they're going to get out of the jam. Some tool they need. It's got to be really clever. It can't be just like a super weapon. It's got to be something really sort of out of left field you wouldn't expect. but I don't want it to totally surprise the reader. They go, oh, that's corny. That feels like it's, the hand of God type of, rescuing them. So I will plant something early in the story that seems innocuous. They go, oh, I don't know why did he mention that? And then later on in that story, that becomes the element that gets them out of that. So people go, oh, I should have thought of that because I did read that back there. So that's to me that I love that when it happens when I read a story or watch a movie where there's some element that you just it just gets stuck in your head like, well, that was weirdly weird. Why did they do that? Or why did that thing? Why is that gun sitting on that table right there? And then it pays off later on.
Now, I do want to make sure that our listeners, if they haven't heard of the Sigma series, they should definitely check it out. It's fantastic. But could you give us just a brief overview
Oh, sure, yeah.
of Sigma series and what brought you to that series and how you got to where you are now? It's quite a few books.
So Stigma is they're a team of special forces soldiers in various disciplines that got drummed out of the service for various reasons. But because of special aptitude or skills, they're secretly recruited by DARPA, Defense Department's Research and Development Agency. And so they become field agents. They're trained in different scientific disciplines. They go through PhD programs to amplify their knowledge based on certain specific topics. So each of them has a certain skill, scientific skill that they bring along with their ex or the former military training. So they act as field agents for DARPA. They face different threats that face most of the technological threats that face the U.S. or the globe. As I like to call, they're just scientists with guns. Is Sigma Force.
So, can you tell us a little bit about jumping over to the new fantasy series, the
Sure.
Moonfall Saga, with publishing? We talk to many authors on the show, and we read a lot of books between the hosts. A lot of the books that we read are from Tor. They've really got a good handle of science fiction and fantasy. How did that come about? Did you say to your agent, "I want to get back into fantasy. Can you make this happen for me?" Did Tor come to you? How did that happen? I'm interested to know that.
So I approached my agent with this idea for a story based on a tidally locked planet. And I thought, well, I could try to make it a thriller by having some type of global threat here on the Earth that maybe could threaten to stop the world from spinning. And I could build a big sort of you know, disaster novel-esque type of story built around the planet slowly beginning to stop spinning. Or I can build the fantasy world. And I told him I lean towards wanting to do the fantasy because I want to return to doing a thriller in the fantasy every year. And he said, oh yeah, this seems more idle. This seems more fit for fantasy. And again, growing up, if you look at my bookshelf, I've got tons of science fiction fantasy over there, and probably a majority of it is from Tor because Tor back, it's still sort of the premium publishing house for, especially for fantasy. I think they rule the industry when it comes to fantasy. I mean, they brought Robert Jordan to the world. They brought
Mhm.
a ton of other fantasy authors.
And so, did you grow up reading all the classic science fiction and fantasy authors?
Oh yeah, I mean, probably even though I read Clive Cussler and I read a lot. I read everything growing up, and that's whenever I teach writing, I'll tell people you should write what you love to read. So if you read in my novels, there's fantastical elements to it. There's scientific elements to it. There's sort of military war action because I love reading Clive Cussler and like reading Tom Clancy and Michael Crichton but my love is still mostly sci-fi fantasy. I mean, I grew up reading Asimov and Heinlein and Zelazny and Anna McCaffrey. Still I think the Dragon series. I don't know why no one's ever done a television series based on the Dragon Rider series. Uh, Louis McMaster Bujold, still just the most fun, hilarious space opera stuff out there.
And you've got some pretty interesting hobbies that has made its way into your work as well.
Yeah, again, this is the Subterranean, which I told you before. It's about telepathic marsupial creatures that live 2 miles underneath Antarctica. Takes a place almost entirely underground because, again, write what you love to do. So when I was an undergraduate and graduate at University of Missouri Columbia, that's where I went to vet school. Missouri is sort of cave central. So one of the clubs they had was a spelunking club or caving club, and so I joined that club. And being able to explore these wild caves out there was just a great deal of fun because when else are you going to potentially set your foot or set your eyes on something that no one's ever seen before. Uh, it's hard to do that now in the world that's sort of all Google mapped across every single inch. But if you go underground, nobody's been there. So, to me, that was just exciting. Besides the physical activity and challenge of it, it was exciting. So when I wrote my first novel, Subterranean, was all about caving. It's basically a basic cave exploration adventure.
Earlier on, you mentioned Terry Brooks, and I noticed in Moonfall he gives a hearty recommendation for the series. And I was wondering what your connection has been with him over the years.
And we still have a warm relationship. When I submitted the first few chapters of the Band of the Banished series to the contest at the Maui Writers Conference, I did not know that Terry Brooks was one of the judges. I just submitted it. It was my very first conference I was ever going to, writers conference I was going to ever attend. It was unpublished. I didn't know, exactly how to function in that environment necessarily. And the first day of the conference is sort of this meet and greet tea where all the participants get to shake hands and rub elbows with the speakers and the panelists. And it's in this big ballroom. It was a big conference. There was like 600 people in this ballroom at the end of summer in Maui. And they required, being a literary event, they required gentlemen to wear jackets. You could wear a Hawaiian shirt, but you had to have a jacket because it's literary. Weird choice for the end of summer in Maui.
Yeah.
Hot, humid, pile 600 people into a ballroom, throw in a bit of a shy, nervous author into that mix. Bad things happen. I don't know how. I'm not a very good. To me, one of the nine circles of hell is a cocktail party. I don't know how to converse easily with, especially strangers. I walk into the room and I'm there by myself. I'm just going there just to see what can happen. Now, I swear, as soon as the doors open, everybody clusters into little circles and are talking amongst themselves, probably about me. And I don't know how to break into the. I don't know how to break. You like sidle up to a group and go, "I like dogs," and hope for the best. You just don't know how to. And so I'm getting more and more nervous. I don't know, how, what's the proper, literary speak you do in these type of things. And I look across the crowd and I see somebody I recognize from Sacramento, where I came from. Now it's not it's just like a friend of a friend. So, but trust me, that's enough of a relationship. I'm going to bond at the hip with this guy for the rest of the conference. Somebody I know. So I hurry up to him, I clap him on the shoulder, give him a little shake. What are you doing here? He turns around, it's Ron Howard, the
Ah,
director. It's Opie from because when he's not wearing his hat, he's a little bit bald like I am right now, and he looked a little bit like my friend from Sacramento, but he was not. And he turns to me and goes, "Well, sir, I was invited." Uh, I'm like, "Oh, I'm just checking, Mr. Howard, making sure you weren't crashing the party." So I sort of slink away. I think this is. I made a fool of myself. Now I'm already nervous. Now I got to worry about Ron Howard's security as I'm walking through this crowd. And then across the crowd, I see somebody else I recognize. And this time I circled this gentleman a few times. I read the name tag this time. And it was Terry Brooks. So I thought, if nothing else, I'm going to shake Terry Brooks's hand because I, read the Shannara series, even though he pronounces it different. He's wrong. It's Shannara. That's the way you should pronounce that name. That is phonetically how you pronounce his series.
How
He's
does he
pronounces
pronounce
it.
it?
I don't. It's very different. It's very Irish.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I should have him train me how to say it because it's wrong. It's Shannara. Anyways, so I thought, I shake his hand, Mr. Brooks. I'm so thrilled to meet you, and I've read you growing up. I remember like getting a sunburn because I was reading, I think it was Elfstones, and I got a sunburn because I didn't want to leave the spot where I was reading because I was so involved in the story. And he looks at mine tag goes, "Oh yeah, I'm a fan of yours too." And I thought, "Oh, is he insulting me? What is it? Why? What is he talking about?" He goes, "Hey, I was one of the judges, and I recognize your last name, and I really liked your story so much that I invited my editor to come over and meet you." And so, based upon that personal introduction, I ended up with a 3-book fantasy offer from Del Rey Books for the series. So yay, Mr.
Wow.
Brooks.
If you did bother Ron Howard a little bit more, you could have been writing screenplays. So maybe, I don't know.
It's
I,
been a
I,
weird
ima-
world. I mean, I met Dino De Laurentiis, who did Dune, the original Dune. and got invited to his house because he wanted to. He was initially thinking about doing a Sigma Force movie. So I was invited to his house. I got to meet him, and that was been very cool. And for a while there, I was working on a rewrite of Barbarella with them. So I've dabbled a little bit on the screenplay writing side. But Amazon MGM has picked up Sigma Force series to do they bought the whole Sigma Force universe to do a streaming series based on Sigma Force. So we may see that eventually too.
Speaking of film, you wrote the novelization of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls.
Yes.
Uh, is that the only one you've done? And can you tell us about that? Because that seems like you're getting all the information that a bunch of fanboys would have loved to have had 6 months
Oh, yeah.
before the movie came out. So can you tell us about that?
Again, I got invited to do the novelization because a lot of my books had been compared to Indiana Jones because there's a lot of archaeological, historical elements to my stories. My stories have both a scientific element and a sort of a historical mystery element to each of the stories. I got this call saying, "Hey, we just got an offer that they want to know if we'd want to do the novelization to the next indie movie." And I was like, "Yeah." That was a no-brainer for me because I was a huge indie fan. I mean, I remember going to see Raiders, just maybe indicate how old I am. I knew Raiders was coming out, circled it on my calendar. Didn't know much about because remember, I don't know if you look all both way too young, but when they were first advertising Raiders, you didn't know what it was very mysterious. They didn't really tell you much about the movie. It was like indie against a sunlit background and some desert landscape, but you didn't really know what it was going to be about. But I loved Steven Spielberg, so I knew I was going to want to see Raiders. Circled it on my calendar. Make sure I could be I had to be there on the first day, first showing. That was, OCD part of my personality. Had to be that first day. Well, unbeknownst to me, the week before they had a sneak preview. So I was not anticipating that. So I had booked a whitewater rafting trip that same day. So I remember just paddling as fast as I could to get out of that river so I could attend that sneak preview of Raiders. So I had to go straight from the river right to the theater. So I was soaking wet when I went to the theater, which is not a bad way of actually watching indie because you get that sort of three-dimensional, I'm just soaking wet. I don't know what people thought about whoever sat in my seat after me. Like, wow, that guy really liked that movie. Uh, so, to be offered a chance to don that hat and crack that whip, of course I'm going to do that. And it was a very clandestine, when I had to drive from Sacramento to San Francisco and go to Lucasfilms and where they would give me the script. And each page of the script had watermarked James Rollins on it so that, if that ends up somewhere, they know who leaked it. But they wouldn't even let me take the script out of the studio. They said you could read it, but you can't take it out. Well, how am I going to go back to Sacramento and write this story if I don't have a copy of the script? How am I going to get the dialogue correct? I can read it, but I'm not going to be able to memorize it. And they go, well, you're just going to have to manage somehow. Either you have to keep coming back or, you can work here in the office. I don't want to, it's a 3-hour drive between those two places. I don't do that every single day. So I said, well, they said, you can take as many notes as you want. I said, well, then can I just copy the script by hand? Can I take that many notes? He says, well, yeah, I guess. Yeah, you can. There's no restriction against doing that.
That's
We
incredible.
authorized to let you can copy as much as you want. So I literally had to hand copy the entire script and bring it home with me. So, and again, when it comes to writing, because they wanted the book to come out the same day the movie was released. So I was writing it while they were filming it.
Well, I wonder if that's what Alan Dean Foster goes through every time because I
I
think
don't
that
know. That's
guy's
true.
he's written 100 of these adaptations. So,
Yep. And Terry Brooks did the first Star Wars adaptation. Uh, so again, he said once he did that, he said would never do it again, but he did do it for Hook later on.
oh, that
But
I
yeah,
have both copies of those actually. That's right.
so it's a great deal. It was a great deal of fun. Would I do it again for India? I probably would do it again. Maybe for certain other properties that I'm particularly enamored with, I might do, but otherwise it's challenging. It's a different process because again, when you know where people say, "Oh, the book is so much better than the movie," because the book usually has a lot more content than a movie. Because you know, to take a book or novel, turn it into a 90-minute, 2-hour movie, you have to trim a lot out of that novel. But when you're given the script and you have to make it into a novel, you got to reverse engineer it. You've got to now add a lot. So in my novelization, there's about a dozen scenes that aren't in the book, aren't in the movie at all, but just I got to make up. Like at the beginning of the movie, you see Indiana Jones pops out of the trunk of a car at the beginning of the Russian car at the beginning of the movie, but you don't know how he got captured and how he ended up in that trunk. So the prologue to my book is how he gets captured. So I got to just make that up myself and just add to the mythos, just from my own imagination.
That's amazing. That is really neat.
Yeah, a lot of fun. And again, you know, writing you're in the point of view. This is a sort of challenging too. I'll use one more example. I hope not belaboring the point, but there was because you're inside the point of view of the character, you're in his skin. So you're thinking like he's thinking. Whereas a film, it's all visual. You don't really know what Indy's thinking. So do you remember the scene where he's in his father's house and he's remembering his father's, you know, you see his father's picture on the mantle and you know his father's passed away, but nowhere in that movie do you find out how he died. Now I'm writing that same scene from Indy's point of view when he's, you know, contemplating the death of his father. He's going to know how his father died, and how he thinks about that is going to, you know, whether you know, did his father die violently? That's going to shadow how he figures. Did his, you know, father die reading his favorite book by the fireside and died peacefully? Did he die mysteriously and no one really knows how he died? You know, however he died will impinge upon how I'm writing the scene because I'm in Indy's point of view. So again, that was one of the situations where I said, "Hey, you know, David, how did Indy's father die?" Because I'm writing the scene, and it's going to impact on how I'm writing that scene. And they was like, "Well, you know, we don't know how. We don't want to tell you how Indy's father died in case we want to make that a plot point in a future book, I mean, future movie. So we're leaving it open ended, so that if it ends up we need to, you know, have that play out differently, we want to leave that blank." So I had to write that scene, never really explaining how his father passed away, which is really which was awkward.
Yeah, but you got the right how he got in the trunk. So that's good enough for now. We'll take that.
Exactly.
You've just come off this a pretty long tour for the Sigma Force, Archangel. What's next?
I've already finished a standalone thriller. It's not a Sigma story. It's a standalone thriller. So that's already put to bed. I'm now writing the fourth and final book in the Moonfall saga. Is what I'm currently writing right now.
And when can we expect that one? Because the third one's out in February, so we got a couple months till that's out.
Sometime in 2026. So this will be February 2025. Will be A Dragon of Black Glass, and A Fist of Molten Fire should be out sometime in 2026.
Okay.
Again, I don't know the exact. I haven't until I turn the manuscript in. They don't give me the date of publication.
Right.
They want to make sure that they actually had the book in hand before they locked on a date.
And did you say that was the final in the series, or is that
Yeah, it's 4 books. It's a 4-book series. It was outlined to beginning as 4 books, and that's what it will be.
a lot of the authors that we talk to have cats around them? There's always a cat when we talk to authors. It's either jumping up on the desk or you see it in the background. We see cats all the time. We don't see that many dog lovers or owners, or at least they're not as common. There we go. Jim is
That's
just moved the
that,
camera to show us a beautiful lab. Is it
that's not even my dog.
okay?
I'm pet sitting. That's Moose. Charlie's
That's
around here
Moose.
somewhere, and then Echo and Charlie are my dogs, but Moose is just a freeloader, aren't you?
So, so would you say you're more of a dog person than a cat person? Is it equal? Is your house full of
No,
animals?
I love cats and dogs. You know, I've got dogs in the household. I didn't have cats initially because one of my Dalmatians was a just would eat a cat. I just could never break him out of that habit. But my clinic had a. I'm going to tell you this one story. Sorry, hope it doesn't. So the first week in which I had started my clinic, this little shopping front of a shopping center, little clinic. First week, this orange and white tabby wanders in the front door. Just wanders in by itself, no collar, unneutered, young little boy. But he's very friendly, not feral. He just wanted attention. I thought it got to be somebody in the neighborhood belongs to him. And so I, put posters and no one ever claimed him. And he was so sweet. His name was Tucker. And so well, all hospitals need blood donor cats. So he'll be my blood donor cat. Not that ever in the 15 years I had that clinic, they ever draw blood from him. But, that was his role. So he was a great cat. He would actually fetch. You bring up a ball, he'd throw it. He would actually pick it up, bring it to you obnoxiously so, to the point where it gets so sopping wet when he keeps dropping this thing on you. Great cat. And then when I eventually sort of set aside my full-time job, I did it slowly. I went from, I sold the clinic to a corporate group, but I stayed on for another year, went from part-time to just weekends, and finally stepped away fully. But the week before I started, I put in my notice that, hey, you know what, I'm done. I'm stepping away. Clinic's yours. Tucker passed away. So he literally walked in the door a week before I left, he passed away. So it's like he was supposed to be the hospital cat. So cats still play and the thriller I just wrote, the standalone, has a lynx that this woman is trying to repopulate in the Italian Alps, which is they're trying to actually to return the Eurasian lynxes to the a species that was wiped out of the Alps. They're trying to repopulate it. So one of the characters in the book is this lynx that plays a major role in the story. So,
that's nice.
yeah. So,
so you had.
Though I have dogs, I still love cats.
I always think that a lot of the stories that I read, well, I shouldn't say they're missing pets. They're not missing animals, but when there is a pet and there is a character that's an animal, that's a companion of a character, it just, I think it makes the human character that they're a companion with so much more relatable. And I find that so important to storytelling. And
I have a sort of dynamic duo that appears in and out of Sigma. They've had their own story by themselves, but they also appear in Sigma. It's an Army Ranger and his military war dog. And I did a USO tour of authors to Iraq and Kuwait during the end of the Gulf War. And so being the veterinarian, I saw these guys working with the dogs, and I was like, can I pet your dog? And they said, well, you want to lose your hand, go for it. But I talked to them, and I tried to find what was that relationship like between the handler and their dog? Do they just consider it is their dog just like a sidearm? Is it just a weapon? And I found out what a deep bond they have. And I kept hearing this phrase from them. It's called runs down the lead. And what that meant, that over the time, once the handler bonds to his dog, up and down that lead or that leash, they begin to have a communication that's unwritten, unspoken, unsignaled. The dog can read the handler can read the dog without needing any type of communication. So I was fascinated by that. So I wanted to try to create that type of character on paper. And so I tried in different incarnations. It just really wasn't gelling, but it wasn't working right. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I realized I was writing all the point of view scenes from one end of the leash, from the handler. I thought the only way to make it work is I had to write point of view from the other side of the leash. So when you see Tucker and Kane in the books, I write scenes from Kane, the dog's point of view also. So I did a lot of, went to Lackland Air Force Base where they train these dogs. I learned about that relationship. And I didn't want to do like a Disney version of the point of view of the dog where he breaks out into song halfway through the novel. I wanted to be authentic, to be like, what would that dog feel like? And how would he react? Because dogs are thinking beings. They're emotional, and do they have PTSD? What is their relationship like when they're in a war zone? So that was a great dynamic, and I still like writing that pair. But trust me, I pretended to kill Kane in one book, and oh boy,
yeah.
It happened about 3/4 of the way through the novel, and it looks like he's dead. And there's so many fan mails. I read right to that page. I stopped reading that book, Jim. I'll never read another one of your books again.
No.
So I had to keep going forward. Just finish the book. Finish the book. It's a fake out.
Oh, really? Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Kane's still alive. Don't worry.
That's neat. That's neat.
Never kill the pets.
No, kill the pets.
Thank you, Jim, for joining us. That was great. I look forward to chatting again. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. We very much appreciate you. Remember, let us know what you think of the show. If you're still here at the end, leave a review, leave a rating, let us know. Send us an email with a book recommendation or a film recommendation. We would love to hear from you. Until next time.